This is NBC Nightly News, Tuesday, April 29th, with John Chancellor reporting from the NBC News Center in New York and David Brinkley's Journal from Washington.
Good evening. The final evacuation of Americans from Saigon has been completed. It began on orders from President Ford, and it marked the end of 25 years of involvement by the United States in Vietnam. About 900 Americans and approximately 5,500 South Vietnamese flew out in 81 helicopters, which made flight after flight out from Saigon to rescue ships off the South China Sea coast. The evacuation was guarded on the ground by 800 American Marines and in the air by American fighter planes from aircraft carriers. The people leaving were clawed at by desperate South Vietnamese trying to leave with them, and fired on by enraged South Vietnamese soldiers who felt the United States had abandoned them. 2 more United States Marines were lost. A Marine helicopter off the carrier Hancock got into trouble and fell into the ocean. Only 2 of its 4 crewmen were rescued. 2 other Marines were killed yesterday in the rocketing of Tan Son Nhut Airport. Brian Barron of the British Broadcasting Corporation is still in Saigon with some other newsmen, and we have a radio report from him on the evacuation.
The final American retreat from South Vietnam began on a sultry mid-afternoon here, with waves of U.S. Marine Corps helicopters swooping onto Saigon Airport. The evacuation of the 900 Americans and other foreigners, which came after President Min ordered them out within 24 hours, is a race against the clock. As dusk falls, there are still Americans in the embassy complex. U.S. Marines in full combat gear are standing on the embassy walls, keeping back crowds of Vietnamese at gunpoint. Some of these desperate individuals are attempting to climb barbed wire barriers into the embassy. A plume of black smoke from a burning fuel depot at the airport rises like a huge exclamation mark above Saigon. Occasionally, the sound of heavy explosions reverberates through the half-empty streets. Initially, there was panic at the airport entrance, with military police struggling to control Vietnamese, soldiers and civilians, wanting to join the evacuation. Several Dolly Green Giant helicopters aborted their landings at the last moment because of the situation on the ground. The communist forces gathered round this capital have not made a determined effort to halt the evacuation. 300 yards from our hotel in central Saigon, I can see scores of looters stripping the now abandoned American NAFTA stores. Tonight, bursts of small arms fire are echoing round our hotel, loosed off by military police to deter other looters. For the first time, refugees loaded down with their possessions have begun appearing in Tudo Street, whence the haunt of GIs looking for bar girls.
As Brian Barron reported at the American Embassy in Saigon, hundreds of South Vietnamese, desperate to get out any way they could, tried to climb that 10-foot wall surrounding the building in hopes of getting on a helicopter. NBC News correspondent Jim Laurie, one of the reporters who stayed behind, told of South Vietnamese clawing at the top of the wall and having their fingers mashed away with rifle and pistol butts wielded by American Marines and embassy civilians. Other South Vietnamese offered huge bribes, and still others looted buildings left vacant elsewhere in Saigon and cars on the streets. The people there were all frightened by the earlier heavy rocket and mortar attack on Tan Son Nhut Airport, which News was at the airport during that bombardment, got out of Vietnam, and made his way to Bangkok. Here is Lord's report.
The bombing of Tan Son Nhut Airport caught the South Vietnamese completely by surprise. The sneak attack was carried out by 3 planes and lasted less than 5 minutes. There was heavy damage. Outside the main gate, police attempted to seal off the base, and the government imposed a 24-hour curfew. But the authorities had already lost control of the situation. Police, soldiers, practically anyone with a weapon began firing wildly into the air. Even this small transport, clearly a friendly, drew fire from the ground. But the attacking planes escaped without being hit, and without any challenge from South Vietnamese interceptors. Smoke billowed up from the field as numerous fires burned out of control. In downtown Saigon, the noise of the bombs exploding and the shooting started a panic. People ran wildly through the streets without knowing what they were running from. Rumors spread in rapid-fire succession. First, they believed that North Vietnamese MiGs were bombing the palace. Then the rumor spread that the Air Force had organized a coup against newly installed President Zong Van Min. Few people suspected that the raid was conducted by aircraft with South Vietnamese markings, probably flown by turncoat Saigon pilots. This was the prelude to the disorder that took place today in the South Vietnamese capital, the beginnings of the final collapse of the Saigon regime. When I left Saigon this morning, it was before the American evacuation had actually begun, but it was already apparent that the South Vietnamese military was finished. During the night, I was trapped at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. The North Vietnamese unleashed a fierce rocket barrage, dropping more than 150 rounds of artillery and rocket fire on the airbase. There was no organized resistance. South Vietnamese soldiers shot at each other, and they shot at Americans who were trying to organize them. The South Vietnamese Air Force did not launch one single fixed-wing aircraft to suppress the enemy fire. They seemed leaderless. By dawn, when the barrage lifted, I saw Army and Air Force officers loading their families onto planes. That had to be the end. For the Army had already crumbled, and air power was the only thing holding the North Vietnamese back. Saigon hasn't actually fallen yet, but it's probably only a matter of hours before the North Vietnamese walk into town and take over. Right now, there's nothing to stop them. Arthur Lord, NBC News, reporting from Bangkok, Thailand.
At least two proposals for a ceasefire were made today by the vice president of South Vietnam, and both were turned down by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, who insisted all their conditions have not yet been met: dismantling of the Saigon military and political establishment and the total end of the American presence in South Vietnam. Also on the program tonight, it was President Ford in a White House statement who announced completion of the American evacuation from South Vietnam, and we'll have that story. It was Secretary of State Kissinger who provided the details, and we'll hear from him. And we'll have reports on the two Marines killed yesterday in the rocketing of Tan Son Nhut Airport, Lance Corporal Darwin Judge and Corporal Charles McMahon, Jr.
That 20-year itch, it doesn't have to ruin a good marriage. Read Dr. David R. Rubin's The Crisis Years in May Reader's Digest. You may think you know everything about why and how Nixon resigned, but you don't. Theodore H. White, master political analyst and author of the Making of the President books, at last tells you the whole story of the president's unmaking. The Fall of Richard Nixon in May Reader's Digest, on sale now.
This is my mother, but a lot of my friends tell me, your mom doesn't look old enough to have a daughter your age.
Well, I do try to take care of myself. I get my rest, exercise, and I take a Geritol tablet every day to be sure I get the iron and vitamins I need.
Geritol, more than twice the iron of any ordinary supplement and some very important vitamins.
And Debbie, you can tell your friends that your mother married very young.
I smell clean. I smell clean. With Lifebuoy, I smell clean.
Hi, Daddy.
Hi.
Daddy, won't any soap get you clean?
Sure, but it's not enough to be clean. You gotta smell clean. That's why I use Lifebuoy. So I smell clean.
Lifebuoy deodorant soap. It's not enough to be clean. You gotta smell clean.
Daddy, you really do smell clean. Now where's my present?
President Ford announced completion of the evacuation of Americans from South Vietnam late today. He made the announcement through Press Secretary Ron Nessen, and the details came from Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Tom Brokaw reports.
The completion of the evacuation was signaled in Washington when Secretary of State Kissinger and Presidential Press Secretary Ron Nessen appeared to brief reporters and to make a joint appeal on the part of the president to avoid recriminations over America's involvement in Vietnam. Kissinger looked weary as he described the completion of the rescue operation.
We got out by with all of the personnel that was there, without panic and without the substantial casualties that could have occurred if civil order had totally broken down. We also managed to save 56,000 people whose life was in the most severe jeopardy. And we had to make a judgment every day how many people we thought we could safely remove without triggering a panic, and at the same time still be able to carry out our principal function and the remaining functions. I think these objectives were achieved, and they were carried out successfully. As for Ambassador Martin, he was in a very difficult position. He felt a moral obligation to the people with whom he had been associated, and he attempted to save as many of those as possible. And that's not the worst fault a man can have.
That briefing ended a drama that began last night. President Ford met with members of the National Security Council in emergency session after receiving word that the situation in Saigon was deteriorating. He had hoped to avoid the helicopter evacuation. The president returned to the White House living quarters, but he stayed in touch with the situation by telephone. He met again with Kissinger before retiring well after midnight. Secretary Kissinger continued to work in his White House office well into the night. At this hour, he was talking with the American ambassador, Graham Martin, at the embassy in Saigon. Kissinger was back at his White House post early this morning, monitoring the evacuation operation, which ran into unexpected delays because of bad weather over Saigon and landing difficulties at the embassy. President Ford kept other commitments during the morning, meeting with Jordan's King Hussein in the Oval Office, assuring the monarch that the United States still wants peace in the Middle East. But by 11:30 Washington time, all of the president's attention was back on the evacuation as he met with the congressional leaders of both parties. Much of this discussion concerned how to finance the care of the more than 55,000 South Vietnamese removed from their country in the past week. The refugee problem appears to be the next political thicket for the Ford administration. With 55,000 South Vietnamese headed for this country, the president will have to determine a budget for their temporary needs and a policy for their long-term presence. Tom Brokaw, NBC News, Washington.
All last night and today, the command center of the Pentagon was crowded with high military officers and senior civilian officials listening to disembodied voices many thousands miles away describe the progress of the evacuation. For more on the evacuation, here is Charles Quinn.
Early this morning, the task force in the South China Sea was ready. 40 ships, 6,000 Marines, 80 helicopters. But the operation got off to a mysterious one-hour delay. The entire fleet of helicopters was ordered to hold back just short of Tan Son Nhut Airport. The Pentagon says it doesn't know who gave the order or why. The choppers flew from carriers to two staging areas in Saigon, Tan Son Nhut and the American Embassy. This Defense Department film shows the same type of helicopters and carriers used in the evacuation. 800 Marines flew to Tan Son Nhut. The operation there reportedly went smoothly. About 4,000 people, mostly South Vietnamese, were taken out by the helicopters. At the embassy in Saigon, there were problems. Reports of swarms of Vietnamese trying to get onto the embassy grounds. Evacuation hampered by darkness and rain. Pentagon sources said only 150 Marines guarded the embassy. The South Vietnamese scrambled to get out other ways. The government helicopters, 10 of them, ditched in a sea near the American command ship Blue Ridge. One crashed into the ship. All people aboard were safe. Thousands reportedly were trying to escape on tugs and barges down the Saigon River. Throughout the operation, the Pentagon said only 2 helicopters had received ground fire. No one was hurt. NBC News has just been told by government sources that all the Marines are not quite out of Saigon yet, that they're having trouble with Vietnamese at the American Embassy, Vietnamese who want to get out with them. There's been some small arms fire, these government sources said, but no immediate reports of casualties, and the last of the Marines are expected out shortly. Charles Quinn, NBC News, Washington.
At the request of the White House, the House of Representatives today put off action on the bill to give more aid to South Vietnam. When it's taken up again, it may include just enough money to pay for the evacuation. NBC News will present a special program later this evening on the end of the American involvement in South Vietnam. It will be broadcast at 10 o'clock tonight, 9 Central Time.
I smell clean, whoa! I smell clean, whoa! With Lifebuoy, I'm not just clean. I smell clean, whoa!
He's gone bananas.
You know, getting me Lifebuoy was terrific. Now, one morning shower and I'm not only clean, I smell clean. Whoa!
Lifebuoy deodorant soap. It's not enough to be clean. You gotta smell clean.
Oh, hey, you really do smell clean.
Half a day, Willie.
Oh, I got it today. Heartburn or acid indigestion.
Here, spoon it away. Ah, listen to me. Chew it away. McGivney, why don't you just wash it away?
What?
Try new Alka-Seltzer Gold. You drink new Alka-Seltzer Gold so it neutralizes excess acid fast and helps wash it away.
Looks like you washed it away.
You washed it away. I told you the boss was right.
Alka-Seltzer Gold washes excess acid away.
In the roaring 20s, people who knew tires demanded the skid resistance, long mileage, and quality of the General Balloon 6. Only the few could afford it. Today, people who know tires demand the quality, skid resistance, long mileage, and gas economy of General Tires' dual steel 2 radial. If only the few could afford it, it wouldn't be such a popular tire.
Sooner or later, you'll own Generals.
Something in the vicinity of 50,000 South Vietnamese have now left South Vietnam, several thousand of them today. Also, 130 South Vietnamese planes with 2,000 people aboard flew to Utapao Air Base in Thailand. A South Vietnamese plane with 130 high-ranking officers and soldiers aboard flew to Clark Air Base in the Philippines. An Air America plane was stopped on the Tan Son Nhut runway by a Vietnamese colonel in a jeep. The plane, stopped by the colonel, picked up his party of 15 and flew them to Hong Kong. And Camp Pendleton, the Marine base in California, received its first South Vietnamese refugees today. Roy Neal has that story.
These are the faces of people displaced by war. They're homeless refugees. The first groups arrived overnight. They flew into Norton Air Force Base in California, looking tired and bewildered by their long flight and the evacuation experience. 356 more arrived this morning at the El Toro Marine Corps Air Station, incoming from Guam to a balmy spring day in California. They were greeted by teams from the State Department, Defense Department, and the Red Cross. They were checked out by medical teams who found nothing seriously wrong with them. Then they were put aboard a convoy of 8 buses. This is the route that will be followed by thousands of Vietnamese refugees. A short ride on the freeways to a city of Quonset huts and hastily erected tents at the Camp Pendleton Marine Base. The end of a long road, at least for the time being, until sponsors and new permanent homes can be found for these people dispossessed by communist victory in Vietnam. They will be under quarantine for a while because local authorities want to be sure they are not carrying infectious diseases.
We don't know what problems to expect, and the only way to know what to expect is to wait and see what is there and then make a decision at that time.
There were care packages waiting for the refugees today, sent by people concerned with their well-being. But a lot of people, including the governor of California, are deeply concerned that these refugees are being brought here.
When we have 1 million people out of work, when we have our own people taxed to the hilt, I'm just very slow to just open the floodgates and say, come on in, unless we provide a way to put Americans to work.
There may be objections, but the Vietnamese refugees are being brought to the United States. The first flights have arrived, and a lot more are scheduled. This base alone has been told to plan on as many as 20,000 people, and the Marine Corps is trying hard to set up accommodations for them. The first wave of Vietnamese refugees will be kept in comparative seclusion here, at least for the next few days. Roy Neal, NBC News, Camp Pendleton, California.
Mrs. Nguyen Cao Ky, wife of South Vietnam's former vice president, arrived in California last night aboard a refugee flight with 13 relatives. Her husband was evacuated from Saigon today by helicopter. Last Friday, Ky said that South Vietnamese who leave their country are cowards.
I am over 40, so my eyes are over 40. And eyes over 40 may produce only half the youthful moisture they used to, become irritated, red. That's why I use Clear Eyes, because Clear Eyes has a methylcellulose formula that replaces youthful moisture, helps soothe irritation, remove redness, I may tell you I'm over 40, but my eyes may tell you something else.
Clear Eyes, for eyes over 40.
Hi, remember me? Money? You know, because people are spending less of me, Smith Corona is helping its dealers to charge less for this cartridge ribbon typewriter. Look, just snap in a cartridge, and in seconds you're typing on a fresh ribbon. And you can snap in color ribbons, even a correction ribbon. Ask your participating Smith Corona dealer for his special low price on this special electric portable. Tell him Money sent you.
Want to meet the real life of the party? It's right here. Carrier's Roundwind, the most attractive central air conditioning unit you can buy and one of the most efficient. Fact is, if all the others in the country ran as efficiently as this one, there will be enough electricity saved this year, we estimate, to power Los Angeles every night for 6 months. To find out what the Roundwind can save you, call your Carrier dealer.
In Johannesburg, South Africa, the young Jewish security guard who took over the Israeli consulate for 21 hours surrendered today. Authorities said he had a history of mental instability. He killed 4 people and wounded more than 30. It was thought at first that Arab terrorists were responsible for the takeover. Greece and the United States announced today that an American air base near Athens will be closed and that 6 destroyers of the United States 6th Fleet will no longer make their home port in Greece. The new Cambodian government said today that the 610 foreigners who have taken refuge in the French embassy in Phnom Penh may leave the country by bus starting tomorrow. 6 of them are Americans. David Brinkley has some thoughts tonight about the end of the American presence in South Vietnam and about why the war there is ending the way it is. David?
The end, when it came, was illuminated with red flares because there at the end of the tunnel there was no other light. In the smoky red glare at the American embassy in Saigon, helicopters are flying from the rooftop, taking away the American staff members and the favored Vietnamese, who, by one means or another, got to go along. The one means or another included friends, influence, and money. That was on the roof. Down on the ground, the Marines, performing their last military duty, were trying to stop the Vietnamese from climbing the embassy wall, storming the building, trying to get inside, hoping to get aboard a helicopter and leave the country before the communists came. The Marines stopped them at the top of the wall as they reached up for a handhold by striking them on the fingers. The war started with B-52 bombers and ended with the cracking of knuckles. As the embassy staff members left from the rooftop, leaving most of their possessions behind, down below, the local people were looting their houses and in the streets taking and stripping their cars. That was how the war was ending. The Americans trying to leave as decently as they could. The South Vietnamese not trying to stop them from leaving, but insisting on leaving with them. Perhaps in the way the war was ending could be seen why it was ending as it did. The North conquering the South and not the other way around. The North was still willing and able to fight. In the South, they were desperately trying to abandon their own country, offering tears, fabricated stories, money, gold, and even themselves.
Mother, I just won't take it. I've got my own laxative, and it tastes like chocolate. Milk of magnesia tastes like...
Chocolate. See? New chocolate-flavored Phillips.
Chocolate Phillips? Does it work?
Of course. It's still gentle, thorough milk of magnesia. The kind of laxative doctors recommend most often. Your chocolate laxative can't say that. Try the Phillips.
Chocolate Phillips. It tastes good.
Hi, I'm a roof. Boy, I really take a beating. The rain hits me, but I'm a Celotex roof. The snow buries me, but I can take it.
Excuse me.
That's all right. Sometimes people climb all over me, but Celotex holds up. And just look at my new dimensional shake asphalt shingle. Beautiful. Get away from me, you pigeons.
Celotex.
Get lost.
Everything, from floors to walls to ceilings to roofs.
Please, get away. Shoot.
We now know that the 2 Marines killed in the rocketing and mortaring of Tan Son Nhut Airport yesterday were Lance Corporal Darwin Judge of Marshalltown, Iowa, and Corporal Charles McMahon, Jr. of Woburn, Massachusetts. Rebecca Bell was in Marshalltown today, and Robert Hager was in Woburn. Here are their reports.
Underneath the statue in the central square of Woburn, Massachusetts, the plaque says Woburn honors her sons. Today, this town had one more name to add to its list of war dead. Charles McMahon, 22 years old, corporal in the U.S. Marines. Word reached the McMahon home at midday today. His parents stayed inside. His friends here were shocked.
I think it's just one of the stupid things that happened. It's just useless. He wasn't fighting no war. He wasn't trying to, we weren't in the war. We were going out of it. And, it's useless. It's stupid, senseless,
The flag flew at half-staff today at the Woburn Boys Club. McMahon had been chosen Woburn's Boy of the Year in 1971. And only 2 weeks ago, he was back here visiting, went skiing with friends, and told them he might be assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. But even then, McMahon realized he might have to go to Vietnam to help in the evacuation of Americans, and confided to one young friend here that before he returned to Woburn, he might be dead. Robert Hager, NBC News, Woburn, Massachusetts.
Lance Corporal Darwin Judge was 19 years old. He joined the Marines right out of high school and volunteered to serve in Vietnam. He'd written home just 2 weeks ago to tell his parents not to worry.
Mr. and Mrs. Judge have another son in the Air Force, and they say they hope he'll continue in the service. They're not bitter. They say they're proud of the sacrifice their son Darwin made for his country.
Well, I feel like he was serving his country. And he was doing what he thought should be done.
Mrs. Judge, I feel the same way. They thought that they should be over there to keep the communists from coming to our United States. And they felt it was their duty to protect us over here.
Mr. and Mrs. Judge are not the only parents in Marshalltown to have lost a son in Vietnam. Over the years, there have been at least 12 others. But until today, residents of this small Midwestern town had thought that part of the war was over for them. Rebecca Bell, NBC News, Marshalltown, Iowa.
The deaths of Lance Corporal Judge and Corporal McMahon are important, just as the other 56,697 American deaths in Vietnam are important. Large numbers tend to blur facts, but the fact is that every death in Vietnam was a singular and unique tragedy, and we may be very thankful this evening that, at long last, it's over. Good night for NBC News.
Tonight at 10, 9 Central Time, see an NBC News special, 7,382 Days in Vietnam. John Chancellor reports on the latest developments in the evacuation of American and Vietnamese refugees. A full-hour NBC News special, tonight at 10, 9 Central Time.
So they draw a circle in the middle of the